got some great ideas on the table here. Vertical density, decarbonization, and you really gave a great setup, Adrian, for our next segment with leading us into the funding thing and us wanting to turn to issues of, as Anthony said to me right before the panel started, he said, you know, we got to get into some of the realistic things here. Because all of this is happening in a stage of a major recession. So I want to get some thoughts from our other two panelists, who we want to thank them for joining us on stage here. We have, right next to Adrian, we have Sandy Diehl, Vice President of Integrated Building Solutions from United Technologies, and to his left, Richard Hanson, Principal and Founder of Mesa Development, Chicago, and one of the major developers here in Chicago. So why don't we start going right down the line with Sandy. Each of you give us some of your opening thoughts and maybe introducing the idea of the economic realities that we face in 2009.
Right, the economic reality of one-year payback projects. First, I would like to introduce United Technologies. It's a name that some know, but some don't know. United Technologies is the parent company for Pratt & Whitney jet engines, Sikorsky helicopters, and of course, my alma mater, Otis Elevator, where I spent 22 years. But UTC also is the parent company for Carrier, which again, most of you know. But what you may not know is UTC also is the owner of Automated Logic, a building automation system, Linnell, which is an enterprise-wide security system, and we have a relatively new fire prevention and security business doing fire protection, detection and alarm, fire prevention systems. So we run the full gamut of building systems, even including fuel cells, geothermal, cogeneration, district cooling, et cetera, et cetera. So it's from that stand that I look at this question. And I guess I would offer a couple thoughts about how the technologist in this space might see where there are opportunities in the future of tall or in urban opportunities. And one, of course, I would call the user interface. I think most building suppliers have spent a lot of time and know the physics and science of their products extremely well, whether it's in the elevator industry, traction, whether it's thermodynamics or dynamics. We know that well and have created as industries great products over the years. But the opportunities could be more in things like paying more attention to space and size, the actual user interface, how a user interacts with the equipment. I hear more building owners and developers comment about how complicated building systems are to operate. In fact, the amount of energy lost through poorly operating systems is staggering. It's, as the Secretary of Energy, Chu, says, it's fruit hanging on the ground, lying on the ground. So we see some opportunities in just helping buildings get tall by making products smaller, easier to install, and easier to use. That would be one theme. A second theme, which may not sound as glamorous, one of the speakers this morning talked about it. It's the emergency evacuation of building process and the synchronization of fire prevention systems, security systems, the elevators themselves, ventilation equipment, and through thoughtful synchronization, again, there could be opportunities to take cost out of buildings, which would then help the future. The third theme is one that Adrian talked about, and it's the most popular theme today, and that's energy efficiency, carbon footprint reduction, all of those words together. And we see, while there's lots of opportunities in buildings themselves, we've done some studies that say we could reduce the energy in a building 70% with known technologies today. Of course, there's some payback issues with some of those technologies. But we actually see the biggest opportunity of all in thinking, as Adrian was talking about, of thinking at a city level or even a district level. If you look at the value of energy in the ground, 90% of it is lost by the time it becomes useful work. So by the time it's lighting these light bulbs, most of it is lost. And a good portion of that is lost as heat loss at the central utility. So if we can find ways to capture that heat and put it to good use through cogeneration, combined heat and power, it's a big savings in our energy food chain. But you have to think about that solution at a district or city level, not just a building level. Similarly, policy issues are easier at a city or district level. So we think in the energy efficiency discussion, we need to spend more time at a macro level of solution. Also, in energy efficiency, there's a whole discussion about measurement and verification. Because until we can measure and verify what we as the building industry are selling and proving, we're going to have reluctant customers, especially in the legacy footprint of existing buildings, and especially today when one-year paybacks are king. But we do see lots of opportunities to support this future discussion.
Thanks. Richard.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the developer. I'm the guy that Mayor Diehl said to look out for. And he's my mayor, so I'm really screwed. I'm really overwhelmed. This is my first conference, and I must say I'm overwhelmed by all of it. And this is really a conference where you leave your ego at the front door because you're going to get overwhelmed by everything you hear. But I didn't hear hardly anybody talk about how much all this stuff costs. And I kiddingly said to somebody, I don't own an oil well. So it's harder for me to build buildings. And Anthony said that, no PowerPoints, come to the thing, spend 2 days, which I've done, and then just give us some thoughts. Well, I'll give you a thought as to what I'm doing today. We built this building called The Legacy, which is in downtown Chicago. And to build that building, I went out and I borrowed $275 million. Which I got to pay back. In addition to that, I have a $15 million mezzanine loan, which we're paying 15% interest on. And then we have $40 million worth of equity, which we kind of promised about a 20% return, because if you're paying 15% on mezz loan, you got to pay more to the equity guy, right? We borrowed that $275 million at 200 over LIBOR. LIBOR is under 1. Our construction loan is under 3. If you talk about the future of tall buildings, I don't know how another one's going to get built by a guy like me, because I don't know where debt is at. And we had an economist, Ray, who's not here, so I'll play economist for a while. There's no debt in the United States, anywhere. You can't borrow money. If you're trying to get your average cost of money to build a building down into the under 10% category, in fact, you got to kind of get it down below your cap rate before you make any money. That solution will only be created when there's liquidity in the system and when banks start lending money again. Let me give you one more thought. Our bank syndicate had 10 banks in it. 6 of the 10 banks in my syndicate formed in 2005 do not exist anymore. 6 out of 10. And I can name some of them, and it's an unfortunate litany. But LaSalle Bank, our lead bank, was taken over by Bank of America. They were co-leads, now it's Bank of America. Euro Hypo Bank is now nationalized. The Royal Bank of Scotland is nationalized. The Bank of Scotland is nationalized. Wachovia has been taken over by Wells Fargo. And I don't remember, there's one more, and I can't remember who took over the other guy. PNC and Nat City, and I don't remember who took over who. The point I'm trying to make again is, what do I worry about today? I worry about keeping those banks in existence while I finish my building and I sell the building. Now I look at my buyers, and the Legacy sold out at about 625. Notice I'm talking money. Yeah, that's what I'm here. I'm talking dollars. We sold out at about $625 a square foot. Chicago is a $600, $700, $800 a square foot town. It's not New York. It's not San Francisco. It's certainly not a lot of the other places that you've heard about today. Someone could have asked me whether a building in Chicago could sell out for $1,200 a square foot. I might have given them an answer, but no one asked me that question. Anyway, what happened? Those people, since I had to be 50% pre-sold to start construction, all of those sales took place in 2005 and 2006. 2005, 2006 were before the decline. Every one of those buyers has to be resold. Every one of those people are wondering right now whether they've got a good deal. They've put 10% down. If you think that the real estate market has gone down 20%, and you're a buyer, and you say, do I want to walk away from 10%, or do I want to close and be out 20%? Am I willing to double my loss? So what do I have to do? I have to convince all my buyers that the legacy as a building has not suffered what the market has suffered, that it's better located, it's an energy efficient building, it's a better building. You know, at $600 a square foot, you got the benefit of your bargain when you bought the unit, not when you closed on the unit. So that's what I worry about every day. And, you know, and I don't worry too much right now about when I'm going to build my next 800-foot building. I worry about getting the one I got sold and closed and paying off that $275 million and paying off that $15 million, paying off the $40 million and wondering, well, whether there'll be anything left for me. So that was one thought. Sorry for all that, but...
That's what we wanted.
Help me.
Reality.
I also wanted to point out that I didn't hear anybody talk about budgets. And Adrian, by the way, and I go back a long way, Adrian was the architect on the AT&T Corporate Center when I was with Stein & Company, and we built and it's a glorious building. He's a great architect. We had a lot of fun. We built it in, 1984 and 5? I'll tell you another story. That was a competition with AT&T Corporate Center. My partner, Richie Stein, and I, 50% owners, we were trying to win the competition. We were in New Jersey talking with a bunch of lawyers and people from AT&T. And they said to us, we want you two guys as developers to guarantee the total cost of that building. And we said, nobody does that. We would never do that. We want you to guarantee half the cost of that building. We said, nobody does that. So finally the guy said, you're going to guarantee 1/3 of the cost of this building personally, or we're going on to the next guy in the competition. So Richie Stein, who most of you don't know, but Richie looked at me and he said, Rich, what's 1/3 of $150 million? And I said, and I looked at him, having no idea what he was doing. I said, it's $50 million, Richie. And he said, okay. He says, do I have $50 million? And I said, I don't think so. He said, do you have $50 million? And I said, no, I don't. He looked at the guy and he said, well, guarantee it all. So, you know, that was a different development world.
Clippers mentality.
Probably wouldn't work today. But those are amongst the things.
I thought that's how contractors, they're the ones who take the risks, right?
Well, yeah, I don't.
They passed on the risk to the contractor who passed it on to us.
Let me state one other
The
thing.
safe tip.
And one more thing that I've learned from the last 2 days, I don't understand the vocabulary. I think we need for a guy like me, I'm a CPA by background. I worked for 17 years at Coopers & Lybrand, ran an accounting firm before I went into real estate. You know, the measurement of power is so strange to me. I don't know what and not as it's strange to me, it's strange to a lot of people. I don't know what a kilowatt hour is. You know, I can't hold it. I don't know how to measure it. I don't quite know what it is. I kind of know a little bit better what a gallon of gas is. And I can kind of convert a gallon of gas into a BTU. So I can talk better in kind of BTUs and gallons of gas and converting things into that. And so, you know, when I listen in awe to Adrian and all the things he's trying to do to the city of Chicago, and he converts everything to kilowatt hours, I don't have any idea what he's talking about. So somehow, and that's my fault, that's not your fault. And I mean, and I think for a lot of this to resonate with developers and owners and operators, we've got to get used to a whole new vocabulary, a whole new way of measure. It's like FAR. You know, I know what an FAR is. I know what a square foot is. I'm not even sure I know what a meter is, by the way. But
a yard.
But a lot of this confuses me because I can't, in my mind, get my head around a lot of what you're talking about. So I think that's one thing I think we need to do a better job of.
Well, let me follow up first with Richard on the point of how you are convincing those. Is there merit to trying to get people to think long term, to think beyond this year, To think they're just immediately saying, I'm potentially going from a 10% loss to a 20% loss. But what about if you're, are you able to get them to think about the following year, the 5 years from now?
Well, we talk about replacement value, by the way. Another thing I haven't heard a lot about here. But, and Mayor Diehl did say, if you believe in your city, if you believe in our country, and you believe that eventually someone's going to build a new building somewhere, that would mean that before that person does that, again, unless subsidized or unless building buildings for other reasons, you eventually got to get back to where someone's going to pay enough per square foot that you can build it and make money at it, so thus replacement value. So yeah, we argue a lot that the city's going to be back to where it belongs in 2-3 years. But then again, being a developer, you wonder how much blood is on the streets, and you wonder how many people are sniffing that blood, and whether they're going to try to get you while you're down. And so it's a matter of waiting them out. It's a matter of being able to say, I think my building is worth this much per square foot, and I'm going to hold to it, and I can outlast the downturn, and I can still get my $600 a square foot by the time I'm done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that was also my little entree of maybe getting us all to think about the real long term. To say more than 2 years. Adrian talked about 2020 and 2030, and we're saying the future of urban tall. So, what if what do we really think? There's all these gloomy scenarios. The science fiction authors write about. Blade Runner, the megalopolises that are, teeming, and actually it's an interesting thing that you showed all those different cities, and some of them are teeming, but where are we going in the future?
Can I ask Richard a question?
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I don't think I'm. I'd
Okay,
rather ask him a question because, in order to try to connect what I was saying to what you were saying, which seemed very disconnected. I wonder if Mayor Diehl or the City Planning Commission told you that you could build a much bigger building on the lot that you own. Would you find that more profitable? Would it be more appealing? And then I would ask, would it be a better city if more people could live in the loop, in the kind of scenario that Adrian was suggesting, and it was also more profitable for you?
Yeah, I would say no, and I don't know. How's that?
Back up.
I don't think I would have wanted to build a building any bigger. It's a Herculean task. One of the things that's hurting me right now is the fact that it did take 3 years to build the building. We've got 356 units on 29,000 square feet of land. So the building is very tall, very thin, took 32 months to build. That's the 32 months that the market, went bad in. Had I built a 10 or 12-story building, maybe a 20-story building that I could have gotten done in 8, 10, 12 months, I wouldn't have this problem right now. I mean, the cycle of a big building is horrible. I mean, it took me a year to buy the land. It took me a year to get it zoned. Took a year to pre-sell, and took 3 years to build. I mean, I've been at this 6 years. I'm only 25 years old. I mean, this ages a person in a hurry. No, I don't think I would have built a building taller. And plus, I would have had more units to sell, more debt to carry. I'm kind of happy, frankly, but it's a big building. By the way, it's 800 feet. I mean, this is not a small, building, and I don't have what it takes to get any bigger than this. But that's probably not the right answer to your question. But can I say one other thing? Mm-hmm. What really amazes me is in all this discussion and what Adrian had to say and what the mayor had to say, and we're all looking to make the cities better. We did a study. I build a lot of building in the suburbs. As far as the parking ratio of the Legacy is 1.2 cars per dwelling unit. We all know that the average in the United States is 1.9 cars, and we all know that the higher your income, the more cars a family unit has. So we said to ourselves, if by moving 356 people downtown, we saved 1 car per family, so we saved 356 cars. And those 356 cars drove 12,000 miles a year. That, and again, converting it into BTUs, that's several billion BTUs of gas saved per year. We did another thing, Adrian, which you get a kick out. There's 48,000 condominiums in downtown Chicago. 48,000, if we said if each one of those did one car, do the same exact calculation, you know, this many BTUs per gallon of gasoline, et cetera, it's 3.3 trillion BTUs a year in vehicle miles driven just from the 48,000 units. So I think to myself, oh my God, how good is that? It seems counterintuitive to me that you keep on laying on me, a downtown developer. All you really need to do is make people move to this, you know, I mean, if you could just get people to move to the city.
Yes.
And the other thing is better mass transit.
Yeah.
What you're saying.
Get them out, get people out of their cars. But instead, I now have a 10% affordable housing requirement. I got a green roof requirement. I got a this requirement. Everything is just getting more expensive, and we're making the city a much better place, which I don't disagree with at all. But talk about low-hanging fruit. Just have people quit commuting 25 and 40 and 50 miles each way to work every day. Stop that. And, it just seems to be a cheaper way to start saving energy than some of the things we're talking about with buildings. I don't know. I might be all wrong on that one.
Vertical density, right.
So that's what I agree with you on.
Okay. Adrian, I think jumping back to my previous question, I think Adrian had a thought about that.
Well, I think that one of the things we have to ask ourselves about all of the densification of the world, basically, and all of the major cities that we're talking about, not just in this country, but predominantly in other countries in the world, is these cities are being built on coastal areas predominantly. And what was it, a couple of years ago, somebody won an Academy Award for a movie and got the Nobel Peace Prize, right, for discussing carbon reduction and what happens if we don't reduce carbon, right? And I think it's generally accepted that if we don't reduce carbon down to significant levels, and the 2030 challenge is the goal line that I've heard be the most important level, that there is a real possibility that many of these coastal cities will turn out to be like New Orleans. And if you just think of the cost of repairing New Orleans from the hurricane damage, which is all water damage, basically, and you multiply that by all of the significant cities on all the coastal areas around the world, you are talking about a phenomenal amount of money. So getting back to the financial aspect of it, if that's true, then what are we waiting for? How do we know that's true? How do we really discover whether that's true or not? But if it's true, we can't afford not to do what we've been talking about. Can't afford it. Chicago is not threatened by that, by the way. But all the coastal cities are. So how do you handle that one issue in terms of densification, in terms of
Chicago's just
how
got
we're
to
going to
keep the
live in the
water out
future?
of the tunnels, right? Got to keep the water out of the tunnels here.
Well, what happens in New York if the Atlantic Ocean goes 6 feet up?
I'm in the floodplain, and the Skyscraper Museum will definitely be underwater about 5.
So, it's a
about
very
4
serious
feet.
area. New York will be underwater, at least the ground plane. Mumbai is already in that situation. I mean, the river there, they've built up above the ground plane around the river. So that is a very, very serious thing. And we all talk about sustainability, but none of us, I hadn't the slightest inkling of what it meant until we started doing the study and saw how grievous it was and how serious the consequences could be and how much power, clean power, we have to do. And this is only relating to buildings. There's another 50% that relates to transportation that I didn't even touch, which you're starting to talk
Sandy,
about.
you're nodding. I think what are you thinking?
Well, this is the dilemma of, the technology guys in that it's great to have this big problem statement. I mean, that's always good to create tension. But I also think we need to try to stay in reality. And one of the things as Rich says, it's about money, and there's money, big-time issues right now. But even where there is money, too often we see, people with vision that don't want to fund the vision, even today. So I think while we maintain the problem statement is huge, we also need to think as practically as we can and start working on all the things that we can work on, such as, tightening up the leaks in our buildings, trying to renovate with technology that we know exists today and has relatively quick paybacks while we work on the bigger problem.
We got some very interesting questions that were submitted in advance of this session, and I wanted to at least get one of those out because this was interesting connections drawn by Leah Ray from Gensler in Chicago. I don't know if she's here today, but she said she notes a recent article in The Guardian authored by Trevor Baker, who argued that soaring towers such as the Burj Dubai or Shanghai Tower tend to signal economic downturns. This is the writer from The Guardian, saying that the Empire State Building, maybe kind of drawing parallels, Empire State Building, 1929, Sears Tower, the oil crisis of 1974, although there's a gap there, about 4 years, Petronas Tower and the Malaysian stock market crash. I don't know. We have to ask our historian what she thinks about this, but just let me, she gets to the question of key challenges for towers coming on the market today, and conversely, is there an upside to building towers in a downturn? Can you take advantage of a down market to build tall? So there's a question there for Carol and for Richard.
Well, I already heaped disdain on the skyscraper index in my
Okay,
talk, and that's what he was referring to precisely.
Okay.
I know the article, and it was
Okay.
precisely what he was referring
Okay.
to. So it's a theory that is no more predictable than ladies' skirts, hemlines, and Wall Street, and of course it predicts after something has happened rather than before. It only proves itself right after there's a crash. So while it is true that the tallest buildings come at the end, as I mentioned in my talk, at the end of a boom cycle, because there's a kind of exuberance, there's a liquidity in the market, and there's a belief that there's money out there. And so that all is extremely predictable. I think it's a good thing, actually, that some people build especially in cities, and there becomes an oversupply, even with a downturn, as witnessed by the Empire State Building did fill up, and it did provide more space, and every city will add, not every city, but New York will add 100 million square feet in a cycle, and then 100, and New York becomes a great city. So what I was trying to suggest, I wrote a book you didn't mention called Form Follows Finance,
right.
which is precisely
that feeds perfectly into our topic.
Precisely explains what I was suggesting in the historical lessons that one can see across building cycles, and understanding that the economic height is more important than the engineering height. So there are all of these lessons that we did learn from history. What we shouldn't learn is not to try to build tall. You got your building in the cycle, and someone will reap a profit from that. But the tall question, I don't think, is actually relevant to the subject of the future of urban tall, because it doesn't have to be the tallest. That was what I was trying to suggest, that size does matter, that we build very tall, but we don't build as large any longer. So I think there's a shift in these sort of tired ways that we think about the evolution of the skyscraper always rising. It really is about cycles. Things happen differently, a little bit differently each time. But what I think is extraordinarily interesting is that things are happening exactly the same in Shanghai in the last 20 years as happened in New York over the last 100 years. And you can see the evolution playing itself out in laissez-faire, in regulation, in political pushback. Everything happens with the same set of...
With dramatically different pace of change.
Yes, yes, precisely. So what I was suggesting is that history allows us to avoid the mistakes and to offer prescriptions for the current problems like climate change. So I think that the solution to a lot of urban problems is densification. I'm distressed that there's huge resistance to densifying in American cities and European, lots of places, and there's a huge resistance to tall. But tall shouldn't be the issue. Shadows should not be the issue. There are other ways to get high-rise rather than tallest. So I see the companion solution to sustainability and keeping energy efficiency as keeping people in cities so they don't drive the cars, so that they live a life that has great mass transit, public amenities, parks, and a denser level. So I think that's the lesson of history that you can see through successful cities like New York and Hong Kong.
Yeah, back to the Richard question in 1 second, but Adrian touched on a point that kind of relates to Carol's discussion, which was gardens, and that made me, gardens, and that makes me think about urban food production, and that this is something that's, in addition to climate change, something that people are talking about. I mean, what happens if our cities are cut off from food production?
People are talking about it, and actually some people are doing it. City Hall has some aspect of a garden, a vegetable garden on top. It harvests honey every year. But I want to get back to the tall issue versus large. I think we studied the John Hancock Center, and the John Hancock Center is one building on about 5 acres, I think it is. No, it's 2 acres. And if you were to take the housing that's occupying John Hancock Center and put it out in the suburbs, it's 750 acres of land. So tall has a place in terms of conservation of land and productive land at that. So, we have, almost 6 billion people to feed? Tall has a place in terms of the conservation of energy or food-producing lands.
Let me get Richard to come in on that question, though, of can developers take advantage of a downturn to build?
I think you have to. I mean, everything happens in cycles. The problem right now is, I think for me, what I haven't quite figured out yet is fundamentally, how's the landscape going to change, and is the change also temporary, or is the change permanent? If you listen to our government, there's no doubt that the FDIC and others, the Treasury, want to recapitalize the banking system, and that they want a new permanent capital level that I've heard anywhere from 25 to 40%. Banks need to be capitalized. Now, I don't know if that'll occur, but if that occurs, can you imagine the return that'll be required by banks in the form of interest on our deals to give a satisfactory return to a 25 to 40% equity group? Now, right now, when we borrowed for the legacy and the heritage, I think we got 85% construction loans to cost. You couldn't get 65% today. So that means that even if I could get that, and oh, by the way, I can't, but if I could, I'd get at best maybe 65%, and I'd have to go out, and the other 35 or 40% would be at 15% type returns, mezzanine type returns, or equity type returns in the 20s. If that stays,
No more development, no more architecture, no more structural engineering.
yeah, if that stays, there's a fundamental change. Now, okay, so maybe, maybe 4 or 5 years from now, everything calms down. Interest rates, liquidity floods the market, interest rates go down, and then that's the cycle you're talking about. Then we're all going to build buildings, and we'll build them till somebody makes us stop.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? A developer is not a good regulator of his own behavior. A bank's a much better one. And I wish the Spire, by the way, one other thought when you were talking, I wish the Spire would get built. I mean, there's no doubt that a rising tide raises all ships. And I think in the city of Chicago, a building like the Spire, 2,000 feet tall, if they could get $1,000, $1,100, $1,200, $1,300 a square foot, I think that would be fantastic for the city and fantastic for me. So, you know, and that can only happen in this cycle. That can only happen in loose money, you know, great anticipation for the future, and hopefully they get it done before the door shuts.